ask you to picture a refugee, just a refugee, one refugee, from Syria or Eritrea or any kind of country. Have you got it? Can I ask you something? Who of you pictured a man? Can you raise your hands? And who of you pictured a woman? Okay, that's clear. We have now identified the problem that I want to talk to you about, the missing piece of the refugee crisis. In January this year, I was in Eastern Europe to do a report on the refugee crisis as a journalist. I wanted to do a story on an aspect that had been neglected ever since the crisis began, the experience of female refugees. In one of the camps, I met Samaher, a brave woman from Iraq. She fled the violence in her country together with her little boy and 2 female friends. She told me that during their journey, they never slept at the same time. One of them always stayed awake, alert, on the lookout. She said to me, "I'm so tired, because even when it's my turn to sleep, I can't. I'm so afraid of what might happen." Now, what might happen to Samaher? I have learned that female refugees run a much greater risk to experience physical violence and sexual assault than male refugees. They run a much greater risk to being robbed or being exploited. Let me start with the smugglers. When you're a refugee, all you can think of is to make your way as fast as you can to a safe country before your money runs out. Because when that happens, you will be stuck. But suppose the man, the smuggler, who's supposed to take you to Europe, suddenly says, "I want more money, or else you'll have to have sex with me." This happens to female refugees. Now, what would you do? We're talking about a situation in which you are desperate to move on. When a woman consents to this, we call it survival sex. But we all know that it's a form of rape. On the road, as a female refugee, you're never safe. All along the way, there are people, border guards, policemen, bus, train, taxi drivers, hotel owners, who harass you and who try to take advantage of you. And even with your own fellow refugees, you are not safe. Many women in the camps never go to the toilet at night because of the risk of sexual violence. Aid workers of the Red Cross told me that many women suffer from urinary tract infections because they don't drink enough in order to avoid having to go to the toilet. Now, there's this general idea that female refugees are protected because they would all be traveling with their families. But in reality, many of them are on their own. They might join a group, so it looks like they are traveling with a family. But what if the man in this group thinks she ought to pay for her protection with money or with something else? This could happen to a refugee, that she has to pay for that. Now, even the women who travel together with their male relatives could be in danger, because the tense situations on the road lead these male relatives to take out their anger, frustration, and aggression on their female family members, sometimes because they're traumatized by war experiences themselves. I heard about a female refugee from Afghanistan who was continuously beaten up by her son. In one of the camps, I saw a desperate woman whose money was stolen. Think of what this means. You find yourself stuck in a strange country. You might not even know in which country you are. It might be a country that is hostile to refugees, where you could be thrown in jail or find yourself begging on the streets to survive. And then there's this friendly man who says, "I can help you find a job. So you can earn some money to continue your journey. Suppose you're desperate enough to go along with him, only to find out that he's a human trafficker when it's too late. When it comes to female refugees, there's always somebody who wants to take advantage of their vulnerable position. Now, something else. It's not easy to have a woman's body when you are a refugee. Suppose you're having your period on the road and you suffer from cramps and you don't have sanitary napkins. Suppose you're pregnant or you're nursing a small baby. I spoke to several of these women in this situation, and what touched me deeply was their bravery and their strength. Think of what it would be like to walk long stretches when you're heavily pregnant, to have to wait in line for hours, to be crushed in a crowd, to walk for miles with 2 small toddlers on your side, or to cross the Mediterranean in a dinghy with a baby in your arms. The women in the camps all said to me, it's much easier for a man to be a refugee. For a woman, it's much harder. Now, one of the women said to me, we're the ones who have to take care of the children. The men only have to take care of themselves. They only have to worry about themselves. Well, to tell you honestly, it wasn't very easy to report on the situation of women refugees. While I was trying to talk to the women in the camps, the men thought the story I was doing was about them. They interrupted the conversations I had with the women. There was one man, I remember, he interrupted me to tell me that he had 2 wives. Sometimes I couldn't talk freely with the women because the men stayed around to hear what we discussed. Sometimes the husbands would take over the conversation, and sometimes I had a feeling there was more to what the woman was telling me, but I couldn't get her to open up. Refugee women don't talk easily about their experiences, especially when it comes to sexual violence. They feel a deep shame. So the story of the women remains unheard. What does this mean? It means they don't get the help they need. It means they don't get the protection they need. And it means the perpetrators go unpunished. Sometimes these perpetrators are individuals, but sometimes they're organized gangs who make it their business to prey on female refugees and migrants. And it's happening right here, in fact, right now. What I learned is when there is a crisis, for women, there's always a crisis within the crisis. For women who live in a country where there's war, there's a danger of having to feed children without a breadwinner. There's a danger of rape. There's a danger of increased domestic violence. Because when all around there is lawlessness and aggression, this lowers the psychological threshold to the use of violence in the home. And when these women decide to flee, the dangers that they face are greater than the dangers men face, like I've just explained. And when they finally arrive in, let's say, Germany, Sweden, or the Netherlands, they are still not safe. I found out that in asylum seeker centers in the Netherlands, women are assaulted and they are prostituted, while outside some of these camps, pimps hang around, waiting for beautiful young refugee women to come outside, ready to exploit them in the sex industry. Now, these women are an easy prey. They're new in the country, they don't speak the language, they don't have a social network. When they disappear, who cares? But on this crisis, within the crisis, there's not much reporting being done. Often we don't know what happens to these women. We're simply unaware of all the humiliations they have to face. Because the journalists that report on war and crisis are mostly men who mostly talk to men. There's so much information that goes unreported this way. Because if you talk to a man, he will mainly tell you what happens to the men. Because he doesn't know what happens to the women, or he thinks it's unimportant. So you only get half of the story, or maybe even less. But if you talk to the women, they will tell you, first of all, what happens to the men. But if you stay on and you win their trust, they will tell you what happens to the women. And thirdly, they know exactly how the children are doing. The women will tell you about the war. And they will tell you about the war within the war, the one that's especially reserved for women. So unless we listen to the women, we will never get the complete story. This is the missing piece of the refugee crisis. Thank you.